The story of Sidney Poitier is not merely a biography of a movie star. It is a monumental chronicle of defiance, a masterclass in cinematic diplomacy, and a testament to the power of the human spirit. It is a journey that spans from the sun-drenched tomato fields of the Bahamas to the glittering yet racially fractured heights of Hollywood. Poitier didn't just win awards, he dismantled a century of stereotypes, proving that dignity was not a luxury, but a non-negotiable right. The fragile beginning, on the edge of life. The legend began in a state of extreme vulnerability. Born prematurely on February 20th, 1927 in Miami, Florida, Sidney was so tiny and frail that his father, Reginald, a poor tomato farmer from Cat Island in the Bahamas, had already purchased a tiny casket. His parents were only in Miami to sell their harvest, and they expected their youngest son to slip away before the night was over. Yet his mother, Evelyn, refused to surrender to despair. She consulted a local seer who promised her that the boy would not only live, but would walk with kings and make his mark across the globe. Sidney spent his early years in the rhythmic rural simplicity of Cat Island. There were no mirrors, no electricity, and no concept of the color line that would later define his struggle. In this secluded paradise, he learned the value of labor and the strength of family. When the family moved to Nassau at age 10, Sidney was thrust into a more complex world, but it was at age 15 that his life took its most pivotal turn. To keep him out of trouble, his father sent him back to Miami with nothing but $3 in his pocket and a suitcase full of dreams he hadn't yet learned how to name. The cold concrete of New York, survival and the bus terminal. Miami in the 1940s was a jarring, violent introduction to Jim Crow segregation. For a young man raised in a majority Black Caribbean society, the whites-only signs were not just insulting, they were nonsensical. Sidney refused to internalize the inferiority the American South tried to thrust upon him. Fearing for his safety, he fled north to New York City. The city of dreams was initially a nightmare of poverty and bone-chilling cold. With no home and no money, Sidney found shelter in the only place that wouldn't turn him away, the public restrooms of a Greyhound bus terminal. He slept on the cold tiles, washing himself in the sinks, and working menial jobs as a dishwasher to survive. It was during this period of extreme hardship that a chance encounter changed his trajectory. While working as a dishwasher, an elderly Jewish waiter noticed Sidney struggling to read a newspaper. For weeks, the man sat with him after shifts, teaching him phonetics and expanding his vocabulary. This act of quiet kindness laid the educational foundation for a man who would one day deliver some of the most sophisticated monologues in film history. The accidental actor, from rejection to the stage. Poitier's entry into acting was born of a dare and a desire to prove someone wrong. Seeing an advertisement for the American Negro Theater, he auditioned, only to be told by the director to stop wasting people's time and get a job as a dishwasher. Stung by the rejection, Sidney spent the next 6 months practicing his speech by listening to radio announcers, meticulously scrubbing his Bahamian accent to master the standard American English that Hollywood demanded. He returned, won a spot as an understudy, and eventually caught the eye of Broadway producers. His breakthrough came in the 1950 film No Way Out, where he played a doctor treated with vitriol by a racist patient, played by Richard Widmark. Even then, Sidney Poitier's screen presence was undeniable. He didn't play the servant or the buffoon, roles typically reserved for Black actors at the time. He played a professional. He played a man with a moral compass. He was already beginning to draw the blueprint for the Poitier hero. 1964, a night for the history books. The 1950s and early 60s saw Poitier's star rise through disciplined powerhouse performances in films like Edge of the City and The Defiant Ones, the latter of which earned him his first Oscar nomination. However, it was the 1963 film Lilies of the Desert that would cement his place in the firmament of legends. Playing Homer Smith, a traveling handyman who helps a group of East German nuns build a chapel in the desert, Poitier displayed a warmth and charisma that transcended racial barriers. In 1964, at the 36th Academy Awards, the air was thick with tension and hope. When his name was called as the winner for Best Actor, the world stopped. He was the first black man to win the prestigious award. His acceptance speech was brief and humble, but the image of him holding that golden statuette was a lightning bolt through the heart of a segregated America. He had reached the summit that many thought was barred to his race forever. 1967, the year of Poitier. If 1964 was his personal triumph, 1967 was his cultural revolution. In a single year, Poitier starred in 3 of the highest-grossing and most influential films of the decade: To Sir with Love, In the Heat of the Night, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. To Sir with Love, he played Mark Thackeray, an engineer turned teacher who wins the respect of rebellious white students in London's East End. In the Heat of the Night, as Detective Virgil Tibbs, he gave us one of the most iconic moments in cinema history. When a wealthy white bigot slaps him, Tibbs slaps him back instantly. That slap heard round the world was a revolutionary act. It was the first time a black man had struck back at white authority on screen with such righteous parody. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, released just months after interracial marriage was legalized nationwide in the US, this film forced a mirror onto white liberal families, challenging their theoretical tolerance with a practical reality. By the end of 1967, Sidney Poitier was the #1 box office star in the world. He was more popular than Paul Newman, Dustin Hoffman, or Steve McQueen. He had become a bridge between worlds, using his stardom to force the industry to see black humanity in its full, dignified complexity. The burden of the trailblazer, choice as a weapon. Poitier's success was not without his heavy burdens. He was often criticized by younger, more radical activists who felt his characters were too perfect or too accommodating to white sensibilities. They called him Saint Sidney, but Poitier knew exactly what he was doing. He understood that to open the door for those who would follow, he had to be beyond reproach. He famously refused roles that were demeaning or that required him to play a criminal without depth. He insisted on approval of script clauses, ensuring that his characters never betrayed their integrity. He wasn't just acting, he was performing an act of cultural surgery, removing the rot of the Sambo and Uncle Tom stereotypes and replacing them with the Poitier man, a figure of intellect, poise, and immense internal strength. He knew that if he fell, the door might slam shut for decades. Beyond the screen, a life of service. As the 1970s and 80s rolled in, Poitier turned his talents to directing, creating hits like Stir Crazy and Uptown Saturday Night, proving that black creators could also thrive behind the camera. However, his contributions extended far beyond the studio lots.